Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. It's episode number 2 of game week number 9 here in the 2025 Penn State football season. The Nittany Lions working their way toward another top-ranked opponent after losing at number 1 Ohio State last Saturday. They will host number 2 Indiana, another unbeaten out of the Big Ten with college football playoff ambitions. Of course, this is one that we had circled as a key matchup overall nationally here in the Big Ten, here for Penn State. That has gone awry in many different ways here over the last 5 matchups as Penn State working its way through a losing streak, as Terry Smith has said repeatedly, trying to get out of the current storm. We'll be back on the practice field later this Wednesday. We'll hear from Terry Smith for the second time this week. We'll get a look at the practice field. We'll give you our notebooks, our photo galleries, our video highlights over at lions247.com on Wednesday evening. For now, we're going to get to our next podcast with Tyler Calvaruso just a little bit later with our second segment on the show. We'll talk about the premier young players on this Penn State roster who are going to be roster retention necessities for the next coaching staff. Whoever is the next head coach here at Penn State, who are they going to make sure they try to keep around before the future, not just for 2026, but also beyond that. And we'll also get into some conversation on the recruiting trail with Tyler Calvaruso regarding some Penn State commits, a new in-state offer who's actually committed to another program. But we will begin this episode, as we often do midweek during a game week, by looking at the next opponent. And in this case, it's Indiana. To help us do that, we bring in Matt Weaver, who covers the Hoosiers for 24/7 Sports. Matt, welcome to the podcast. We really appreciate you for offering your perspective on the upcoming matchup.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the obvious. This has gone from Indiana just being kind of just another squad on the schedule that, you kind of really don't pay much attention to preseason, to being one of the premier programs in college football now for a 2-year span. They have obviously kicked to the curb any thought that it was going to be a one-year wonder kind of situation, a flash in the pan for what they were able to accomplish in 2024, reaching the college football playoff. How have they proven to you, how have they proven to everybody to have this kind of staying power consecutive seasons now?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, Indiana was the get right game for teams. Like if your season wasn't going great, or maybe you're coming off a loss and you had Indiana next, it was your chance to get things back on track. And yeah, it's been I mean, quite honestly, incredible what Curt Cignetti has done. And it's hard to really. People always ask, how does he done it? What have they done? It's hard to pinpoint one thing. I mean, they've brought in good players, but if you go by the rankings, their roster is like the 72nd best roster in the country. When you go by the rankings out of high school, and obviously these guys have developed and gotten better, but I just think the biggest thing is his mindset and the culture he's developed. And I know those are buzzwords, but it's really true with Indiana. They play every play like it's the last play. They're incredibly well coached. They're disciplined. They're mentally tough. And they've got good players. They've got guys, and they've gotten better a lot of positions where you need to be good at up front, especially. I think for me, you knew the first 3 games they were probably going to win pretty easily. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, the Illinois game. And Illinois, I think, was preseason. I want to say top 12 or 15, somewhere around there. They're probably not that good, but it's a quality team. They'll go to a bowl game. And Indiana blew their doors off. It was like it was an FCS team. Completely dominated Illinois throughout the entire game, and really have done that all year, with the exception of probably Iowa. That was obviously a close game, and Iowa gave them a real battle. But this team is they're very businesslike. They don't make a ton of mistakes. Are they perfect? No, but nobody is. They don't get hounded down by a previous good play or bad play. Like I said, they play every play like it's the last one, and it's really a reflection on Cignetti and his staff and what they've been able to implement. And then the players. You've seen it. You've covered. You got to have player-led teams. Great teams are player-led, and the coaches can talk all they want, but if the players don't live it, it's really, really hard to be successful week in and week out.
Just to kind of hammer home where the journey has been for Indiana in recent years, Tom Allen, who was the defensive coordinator here for Penn State last year, his last 3 years with this program, 2-10, 4-8, 3-9. And then Cignetti comes in. They go 11-1 during the regular season last year. Their only loss was against Ohio State. Then they lose to Notre Dame in the playoff, which ultimately happened to Penn State as well down the road last winter. Indiana comes out of the gate this year at 9-0, looking for a 10-0 start in Beaver Stadium. It will be their first win ever in Beaver Stadium. And overall, this is a series that is 25-2 in favor of Penn State. 3 consecutive wins for the Nittany Lions. But as we discussed on Monday, it's a whole new ball game right now for both Penn State and Indiana. When you look through their schedule so far, I think that the game that turned the most heads for Indiana, the Illinois matchup, as you said, I think Illinois was number 9 at the time. They boat raced them 63-10. That was obviously a moment where people paid attention to Indiana. But I think what really caught the national attention and probably here across the Big Ten landscape was going on the road to Eugene, beating Oregon by 10 points. At that point, Oregon was the number 3 team in the country. They were just a couple of weeks removed from coming here to State College and beating Penn State in overtime. What did you learn about Indiana in a high-profile spot like that on the road against Oregon?
That they can match up. I mean, that was a game I had kind of earmarked as a loss before the season. I just thought going out there, Oregon is incredibly talented, really well coached. Dan Laney and that staff do a great job. And I thought the speed and the atmosphere would be too much for Indiana. And I mean, it really wasn't. I mean, I want to say in the second half, Oregon had like 64 yards of total offense. And a third of that came on the last drive when it was basically the very end of the game, and IU was playing prevent. You had Indiana was up 7. Mendoza throws that makes a poor throw. The receiver doesn't run a great route. They get a pick 6, and it's 20-20. And I'm thinking, okay, this is where it kind of – and they go right back down the field, convert some third downs, hit Surratt on a 3rd and 8 from the 8-yard line, 3rd and goal from the 8 for a touchdown, and really never looked back. And it was a 10-point game, but really that was Indiana pretty much dominated that game. I mean, in most facets, just the way they matched up the physicality. I think, and Indiana's offense is good and they're scoring a ton of points. This defense is really, really good. Brian Haynes has done an incredible job. And the rest of those defensive guys, they're physical. They fly to the ball. I know everybody wants to do that, but they really do it. Last week they go to Maryland, and I know Maryland's kind of struggling, but they were leading the Big Ten in turnover margin. They turned the ball over, I think, 5 or 6 times, take it away from Maryland, win the turnover battle. The back end, the safety play at the beginning of the year was a little bit shaky, and now they're playing absolutely fantastic. Up front, they're getting after guys. They're leading. I still think they didn't have any sacks and not many TFLs against Maryland, but I want to say they're still leading the Big Ten in those categories. So it's a really well coached team. Defensively is where it really stuck out to me in that game because I just thought you saw Oregon. I know Oklahoma State's terrible, but my Lord, they had like 14 points after like 3 plays against a P4 team. So I really thought it would be tough to slow them down. And not only did they slow them down, they kind of shut them down. They only had 1 offensive touchdown in that game, and the defense was fantastic. And one part of this team that gets overlooked, and the reason why is because they're not is special teams. Great teams have really good special teams. I know Penn State in the past has had good special teams. You look at Ohio State and the good teams; they're good in that category in that unit. And Indiana special teams has been fantastic. They blocked some punts. They don't give up big returns. Their punter, their kickoff guy's been out the last week, Brendan Frankie, and he has been. It's just been touchback after touchback. But even the backup, all the guys, their field goal kicker's been outstanding. So it's just a really complete team that's playing really well and firing all cylinders. And that Oregon game was the first, like you said, that was the first real test for them. And they went out there and obviously passed it with flying colors.
I do want to get to Brian Haynes, the defensive coordinator, because he's going to be up for that Broyles Award that goes to college football's top assistant. I believe he's been a semifinalist for that award in the past. But before we do that, you look at the Heisman Trophy odds here in week 1 of November. We just saw a guy that people believe may be on the top of that list, Julian Sayin at Ohio State. But if it's not him, a lot of people are pointing to Indiana's quarterback, who now takes on this Penn State defense, Fernando Mendoza. He was a 3,000-yard passer at Cal out west last season, makes the move to Indiana, and through his first 9 starts with this team, 72% completion percentage, 2,100 yards, 25 touchdown throws, 4 interceptions. He also has 4 touchdowns on the ground, so just about at 30 touchdowns total through the first 9 matchups. What has gone so right for Mendoza in this offense, and who are the players around him that really take this group to the next level? Because they're pouring 50-plus points on teams on a week-by-week basis right now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Fernando's a really smart guy. I mean, if you know his story at all, he wasn't highly recruited out of high school from out of Miami. He was committed to Yale, and then Cal offered him late, so and he wanted to obviously play at that level. So he went to Cal, was obviously there for a few years, and then transferred to Indiana. He's real smart. He's tall, like 6'5", 200 and what is it, 220 or so pounds. He's got a good arm. I don't think I'd call it elite, but he can make all the throws you need a quarterback to make. I've seen a lot of comparisons to him at the next level, like a Jared Goff, and I think that's probably fair. I mean, Jared Goff doesn't really wow you, but at the end of the game, he's got his teams usually are winning, and he's got good stats. His stats have actually been held down this year. For one, me and Jared did our podcast yesterday. He sat out like 5 quarters through the first 9 games. Because they've been so far, and then the running game has been spectacular. I mean, they ran for 367 last week at Maryland. So when you're running for 367, you don't really need to throw the ball a whole bunch. But he's played really well. I think whether he wins the Heisman or not, that would be great because obviously Indiana's never had something like that. But the most important thing are the team goals. I mean, they pulled him pretty earlier than usual last week at Maryland, and because they've been getting there a little bit, had some guys beat up. But he's the Oregon game is a perfect example. He throws the pick six. They're going crazy. It's 2020. He goes right back down the field, leads them down the field on a long drive, gets a touchdown in Indiana, basically puts it away after that. So he's very unflappable. Like I said, highly intelligent. Talking to him is a lot of fun because he'll give you great quotes. So it's just he's been a perfect fit, and he can run a little bit. Last year, Curtis Rourke had a great season, but everybody found out afterwards he was playing with a knee injury, but he didn't give you anything as far as a run game. Mendoza's not Lamar Jackson, but he can keep the ball and get it. Against Maryland, he had like a 20-yard run. He had some good runs against Oregon to get first downs. So that's something that he gives you that they didn't have last year, and that's really been beneficial. As far as the guys around him, we'll see on Elijah Surratt. He tweaked the hamstring against Maryland, and he had caught a pass I think in 46 straight games. If it wasn't tops in the country, it was right up there. Didn't have it. That streak was broken because he left after like the first or second possession against Maryland, and that's a big loss. If they don't have him this week, I mean, he's a stud. He's an All-American receiver. He's really good. Omar Cooper has stepped up this year and played well, and he played well last year. E.J. Williams, another guy. But after that, you're going to be going to some younger guys. Charlie Becker, who's a true sophomore. They do have Jonathan Brady. They brought him in from Cal in the spring, played with Mendoza last year. He's a solid player, but if they don't have Surratt, that's going to be a significant loss. They're going to have to figure out a way to make up for that production. This week against a Penn State defense that can cause you problems. So, running backs, Kalon Black and Roman Hemby have been phenomenal. They don't throw the ball a ton to the tight end, but if they do, it's usually Riley Nowakowski, who is at Wisconsin, transferred in this year. Their offensive lines play well, though one of their starters is out. He was out last week. Drew Evans, the left guard, will be out again this week. Started off a little bit slow, the O-line against Maryland. His replacement, Zen Michalski, a transfer from Ohio State, but came on. So, I mean, they've got weapons, but again, they'll figure something out. They're well coached, but without Surratt, that's their go-to guy on when they need a big play. Like if it's 3rd and 7, Mendoza looks for Surratt. I mean, he throws the ball to him a ton, and they'll like I said, they've got other good players, but it's hard to replace a guy who has that kind of talent.
And by the way, Surratt, 10 touchdowns through 9 games. That's nothing to sneeze at. And Terry Smith, exactly. I think the interim coach here for Penn State on Monday in his press conference, I think he may have surprised some people when he said, remember how I just said we played the best tandem of wide receivers we've faced at Ohio State? And that was a big performance for them, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. He said, well, these guys actually have more combined touchdowns at the top of the receiver depth chart in Cooper and Surratt. So another huge test for the secondary. You mentioned the running back tandem, Black and Hemby, both of them over 600 rushing yards. Hemby's a guy who played a ton of football for Maryland over the years. We've seen him in a Terrapins uniform. He's done a nice job with the Hoosiers. And just to put things in perspective on how this offense is humming right now, 2 receivers are at 45-plus catches for Indiana. No receiver on the Penn State roster has reached 30 catches over the course of their first 8 games of the season. Let's switch over to defense. What has gone so right for defensive coordinator Brian Haynes in that unit, and who are the individual game wreckers, guys that can blow up an opposing game plan, guys that could swing the momentum in Beaver Stadium Saturday afternoon?
Well, I mean, I still, football's changed obviously over the years. It's become it's become a perimeter game and everybody spreads you out and all that kind of stuff. But to me, football's still one up front. The great teams have good offense and defensive lines, and for Indiana, that's where it starts. They're guys, and it's a bunch of not a bunch of household names. I mean, Tyreek Tucker was a JMU transfer that was not highly recruited out of high school. Hosea Wheeler from Western Kentucky transferred in this year. Mario Landino was committed to JMU when Signetti and that staff were there. Had a lot of like FCS offers and some G5 offers. He's playing great. McCall Kamara, everybody knows what he did last year for Indiana, but he was another guy that wasn't highly recruited, transferred in from JMU. But they're really well coached. They tackle well. They fly to the ball. They get after. Like I said, I'm not sure the exact stat, but I know for most of the season they've led the Big Ten in sacks and tackles for us. So they will get pressure on the quarterback. Haynes is really, really good at drawing stuff up and maybe showing something pre-snap and then changing it. They look like a blitz coming from one side and then maybe it comes from the other side. They just do a really good job. Like I said, the secondary is playing well. D'Angelo Pons at corner is really good. An All-American last year at safety. Devin Boykin transferred in from NC State. Missed last year for NC State because he tore his ACL in the bowl game the year before, sat out all of 24, transfers in, and he has been phenomenal. Amari Farrell, Lewis Moore has been really good. He was at Indiana, left, went to Ole Miss, and came back after 1 year. And he has made a bunch of big plays, made a huge interception at Maryland. Linebacker, Aiden Fisher's another guy they may not have. I think he'll probably play. He went through warm-ups at Maryland, and they're saying, Signetti, I don't know how over there, Signetti doesn't give you anything on injuries. I mean, it's like the CIA when it comes to the injuries. They don't tell you anything. But he did say that they're optimistic, and he went through warm-ups at Maryland, and I think he probably plays now. Maybe he's on somewhat of a snap count. I don't know. But their linebackers have been great. Isaiah Jones has been a revelation this year. He played some last year, and a kid from out of Ohio played some last year, and actually one of the few guys who stayed after the coaching change with Signetti. And he's been awesome. He's really great at blitzing. He filled in for Aiden Fisher last week at that Mike position. They came in, they played a 4-2-5, but they played a lot of 4-3 this year with Fisher, Isaiah Jones, and Roloja Hardy, the three linebackers. And I would guess if those all three guys, if Fisher's good to go, they'll probably do that this week to try to slow down that running game for Penn State and have a bigger and extra, instead of a DB, have a linebacker out there. But they can give you different looks. They get after you. Like I said, they tackle well, and they just make it rough. And I they're playing a young quarterback this week in Ethan Grunkmeyer, and I think they're probably going to try to do a lot of things to confuse him. Obviously, you guys slow down Allen and Singleton, and if they can get them in some, uncomfortable second, third downs, I think that obviously plays into their favor because, Ruckelmeyer's talented, but he's a young guy. He hasn't played a lot, and I think they're going to try to muddy the picture and get after him and maybe force some turnovers.
It's truly remarkable in the modern age of college football where you're working your way through the defensive standouts and you got former JMU commits, you've got former three-stars, you got a quarterback who's in the Heisman Trophy race who really no one was looking at much coming out of high school. And yet here they are with one regular season loss through, I think, 21 games under Kurt Signetti now in the regular season. Really just remarkable. And so I want to flip it and ask you this before we get into your prediction. Penn State has plenty of talent. They've got a bunch of former top 100 prospects. They've got guys who they had a battle for against the elite of the elite in college football. I know Ryan Day referenced that last week in saying they needed to be on their P's and Q's because this was still a team that had the talent on the field. But we have watched things unravel here in Happy Valley. 5 consecutive losses going from a number 2 national ranking where Indiana currently resides to under 500 and in jeopardy of even making any bowl game. And so when you look at the perspective toward Penn State from Bloomington this week, what are you hearing? What are you picking up about what this matchup means and how they view these Nittany Lions?
Well, I mean, for me personally, this is a scary game because, like you said, the talent's there. And me and Jared in our podcast yesterday, we talked about. And obviously, you're much closer, but it's just baffling to me how this has just gone sideways so badly for Penn State. They were, preseason.
We are baffled too, Matt. Just let me put it. We are baffled too. We don't have any reasons, excuses to offer right now.
And I'm not trying to call out anybody inside that locker room, but to me, from the outside looking in, this looks like maybe the player the player leadership maybe wasn't as strong as it needed to be. I don't know. That's my guess because they let that Oregon loss become a bunch more losses. And then that was I got to see some of that game and they played well and obviously you had the turnover at the end, but somehow that game and maybe it was manifesting it before that. I don't know. But it's really hard to fathom how it went sideways so quickly. I mean, I think people are still looking at this as a game where Indiana's got to come out. I mean, I expect listen, Penn State's a proud program. I know it's not everything that they had, all the goals they had before the season are pretty much, out of play. And their goals were not to go 6-6 or whatever it may be and play in Detroit. But still, you've got a lot of guys on that team that are going to play in the NFL for a number of years, whether it be next year or whatever. They've got really good players on that team. Those running backs are studs. And there's talent, especially on that defensive side that could give Indiana problems. And if Indiana's not ready to play, it's going to be a tough game. I would expect Penn State to come out, try to punch them in the face, punch them in the mouth. Indiana's going to have to weather that early storm. I just wonder as it goes along, if Indiana starts to put some points on the board, what does Penn State do? I obviously I don't cover them as closely as you do, follow them as closely as you do, but I just wonder if do they mail it in a little bit, because of what's gone on over there. I mean, it's got to be tough. I mean, like I said, that's a really proud program. They've got great tradition. I've always had a ton of respect for Penn State and what they've accomplished. And Penn State needs to be good. I'm going to say this as an IU guy. Penn State needs to be good in football. It's good for the Big Ten. It's good for college football. And I hope, Pat Kratz is actually a friend of mine. He was a linebacker when I was a manager at IU. And I got to know Pat. Now we don't, he's so busy. We don't communicate that much. But Pat's a great guy. I think he'll hire a good coach. And I think Penn State will be good. But everything's better when Penn State's good in football. They really are. And it makes it harder for everybody else. And, but it's a program that needs to be good in football. Just like, in my opinion, Indiana basketball is a program that needs to be good in basketball. It makes the conference better. And I hope they get this right and they get rocking and rolling again. But, I think people still look at this as it'll be a quality win. I know they're down, but going into they've never won there. They've never won there. Like you said, 25-2, and one of those was the fluky 2020 COVID game. And the other one I think was when Bill O'Brien early, maybe his first year, and he was trying to rebuild the program, and I think Indiana handled them pretty good in Bloomington. I want to say it was a 2 or 3 touchdown win. So they weren't vintage. It wasn't like a vintage kind of thing for Penn State. These weren't where they were at their full strength or whatever. So, and I know this is not a vintage team either, but this would still be a quality win. And Indiana needs to go in there and they'll be ready to play. And it'll just be, they as long as they take care of what they do well, they don't turn the ball over. They they play like they've been playing. I think they come out with a win. But this is a game where if you're a little bit flat and Penn State gets some momentum, it could be a scary game for IU.
Yeah, we saw in Ohio Stadium last week, 17-14 at halftime. Ohio State fans kind of wondering what's going to happen next. Well, what happened next was 21-0 Buckeyes after halftime. Penn State could not keep up, and it turned into a significant gap for that loss. By the way, if you're viewing Indiana as any inferior to Ohio State, you need to recalibrate the way you're viewing this Hoosiers team. They lead the Big Ten more than 46 points per game. They're second in the conference in allowing points, less than 11 points per game. And I think you look at the eye test, whatever have you, we'll see if they get a chance to play down the road in Indianapolis. But I would put Indiana right there with Ohio State, if not even a nudge ahead based on what they've done over the course of this season. So with that in mind, what do you have for a prediction for this one? How do you see it playing out against Penn State? And ultimately, what do you have for a score?
Yeah, I think honestly, it could be kind of similar to last week, the Ohio State game. I got to watch it. I didn't go to Maryland, so I got to actually sit at home and watch a little bit of football, during the day. And they came out and they ran the ball. Well, I mean, that first drive, they had like a 25-yard run. I want to say on the first play of the game, they had like a 25-yard run. I think the problem, I think where they had probably looked like last week, they had some problems is when they got down the red zone, and the passing game has struggled a little bit. So I think it'll be a game, go at halftime. I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of a similar score. And I think Indiana pulls away in the second half. And, I'm trying to think what I said on our thing. I think I was a little bit ambitious on our podcast. And I think I made it like 42 to something. I'm going to scale that back a little bit for you. I'll say 35-17 Indiana. I think that's right around the number. But like I said, this is it's so surreal that Indiana is a 2 touchdown favorite in Happy Valley. And I mean, this is, I don't think that's going to be like this is going to be the norm. This is kind of an outlier, but it's really, really weird. But this is a game where Penn State could win this game. They really could. I know people over there probably aren't having a lot of confidence, but this is a talented team, and they do have dudes. I mean, they have some dudes on that. I think the biggest thing is if they struggle to run the ball, and I think if I'm Indiana, I'm going to make Ethan Reckmeyer beat me. I'm gonna make him have to make throws to beat me. You can't let Katron Allen and Nick Singleton go crazy. And I think that's what I would do. I think that'll be their game plan. We'll see if I'm right. But I think if they can slow down that running game, and then on the flip side, what kind of surprised me about Penn State, real quick, Tyler, they're like in the Big Ten, they're second to last in rush defense, which is so un-Penn State like. And even when you count in the non-conference, they're still like in the bottom third. And it's just so weird because Penn State is always so great defensively. So I think that's where Indiana, I think, if Indiana can run the ball like they've been run, I don't expect 367, but if you can get around 170, 180 and hold Penn State, under 100 yards or right, or make it tough for them to run the ball, I think that really obviously will be huge for Indiana. So I think in the second half they pull away, but again, they're going to have to come out and play 60 minutes because this is a Penn State team and their home field. They're not going to want to get embarrassed.
Yeah, Matt, really appreciate your perspective. We'll see how it plays out. Noon kickoff on Saturday between number 2 Indiana and these Penn State Nittany Lions. Wishing you well with the rest of the season of coverage. It's going to go a lot deeper than ours, I think. Have fun with it, and we'll catch up with you later.
Thanks, Tyler.
As promised, we're going to get into some forward thinking here on the podcast, beyond what's right in front of our face with this challenging matchup for Penn State. You've got a coaching change on the horizon. We've been documenting that over at our Penn State hot board for the coaching search at Lions 24/7. Hopefully you've been a part of that. We're up over 2.5 million views on that thing. I think we're right around 40,000 comments at this stage. So it's been a great community conversation. We'll keep it going. We may only be about halfway through that process realistically right now when you look at the timeline for when coaches are going to make moves here and the carousel will really get rolling. But whoever that head coach is going to have a really important spot on their to-do list for roster retention. Some of these guys that we've talked about throughout the season are seniors. Some of them are probably heading toward the exit door to see what's next. But many of them are young first, second-year players who we've gotten some glimpses at. Some maybe not as much as others, but they're going to be pivotal for establishing the foundation of whoever takes over that leadership position for the Nittany Lions. No one knows the young segment of this roster better than Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider. He covered these guys throughout their high school careers, covered them in prospect camps, and has really done his diligence to stay informed on their development since they've gotten to Happy Valley. So we're going to pick up the conversation with Tyler right now here on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Tyler, welcome back in. Always good to hear from you. And we'll do people a favor. We'll stash some recruiting notes for later in this conversation because I know people aren't really excited to hear about recruiting right now. We'll get into a little bit about this being the first game where they're going to have visitors on campus without James Franklin as the head coach. We'll talk about some things happening with some commits. But first things first, you have a story up at Lions247.com here on Wednesday. 10 names that you think are priorities in terms of what I just laid out, guys that need to be retained by the next staff. Who is at the top of your list, if anyone's at the very top?
Chaz Coleman's definitely at the top. I think last weekend was a reminder of what he can do when he's 100%, battling back from that illness. You saw who Chaz Coleman really is, just flashing his upside on the defensive line as a pass rusher. Guys like him, they don't come around often. You got him in your building, so now you got to work to retain him. It's going to be easier said than done, and it applies to him and applies to everyone else that I wrote about this morning in that piece that you just mentioned. There's going to be a market for these guys if they want to explore. So for me, Chaz Coleman is at the top of the list. I'd put Xavier Gilliam and Yvonne Kamaju right up there along with him as well, because you just need quality defensive line depth in the Big Ten. You need quality pieces on the deal. I know that's a very obvious statement, but the obviousness of it is why it is so important. This new staff, you want to have those guys that can contribute in the trenches. You want to be able to stop the run. It's paramount in this conference. You got to have guys to do it. Gilliam has drawn nothing but rave reviews since the moment he stepped on campus and joined this program. Same deal with Yvonne Kamaju. Gilliam obviously has a little bit more seasoning behind him, more game experience, which puts him higher on the list than a guy like Kamaju, who's still coming into his own after flashing on the road against Iowa. But both of them are really, really important. Then you've got guys on offense. We just talked about the trenches on the D-line, the O-line, guys like Cooper Cousins, TJ Shanahan, Malachi Goodman. I know that with Goodman, it's more of a projection than some of the other guys. But look, the fact of the matter is 5-star offensive linemen who move like Goodman at 6'6", 315, they don't grow on trees and they don't land in your program often, regardless of where the recruit's located, where he's from, his relationship with the staff. It's just not something that comes around often. So we've got those three guys on the list. Kobe Howard out wide. You need weapons if you want to succeed in the passing game. Howard, I know he's played sparingly, and I know it's been a topic of conversation, but I think he's on that list as well because you want to remain explosive. You want to continue to beef up that wide receiver room. Keeping a guy like Kobe Howard only helps you achieve that feat. So there's a lot of young talent on this Penn State roster that I believe is key for the next staff to keep. I didn't even touch on guys like Andrew Olish, Max Granville, who's working his way back from injury, Ethan Grunkemeyer. I did want to say with Grunkemeyer, the only reason that I didn't really touch on him in depth has nothing to do with arm talent or anything like that. Scheme fit is just going to be what it comes down to. It's going to come down to, one, whether or not he can thrive in that system. Two, whether or not he wants to play in that system, because you can be as talented as you want. If you're not a fit, you're not a fit. And especially in a day and age of college football where you can retool and rebuild a quarterback from kind of on the fly through the transfer portal, it makes finding that ideal fit for you as a passer all the more important. So we'll see where Ethan Grunkemeyer stands at the end of all this. We could have a situation where he fits the new system like a glove and he's at the top of the list from a retention standpoint. So there are a lot of variables with that. A few other guys as well that, scheme fit's going to be important. But centered on those 10, those are the ones standing out to me right now.
You gave me the whole list there. Well, I promise we're going to get to just about. We're going to get to some other names. We're going to get to some other positions, but I want to circle back to what you said about the defensive line and almost push back a little bit because you mentioned the seasoning, Kamaju not really maybe having it. He's starting to build it up. I mean, while Chaz Coleman has had some flashy moments and he really showed up for the first time in a significant way in Big Ten action on the road in Columbus with a key pressure in the red zone on third down and then a scoop of the fumble and helping set up a Nittany Lions short touchdown drive with his return, Kamaju was over 30 snaps. Yeah. I mean, he was almost at 30 snaps against Iowa. He had a tackle for loss against Ohio State. He's got 3 of those now on the season. And I think we've got to start paying more attention to him because he kind of got buried by Chaz Coleman in our conversation. And I remember last year, or I shouldn't say last year, last winter, last spring, Kamaju was one of the hottest names in this class. And then Chaz Coleman shows up in the summer, does what he does in preseason camp, does what he does in non-conference play. And everyone's kind of like, Yvonne who? But he is reminding folks, and by the way, he is viewed as the more complete defensive end right now, whereas Chaz Coleman is viewed as a superior pass rusher to this point. So it feels like Coleman maybe is more of a situational defender for them, whereas Kamaju has a chance to be an every down type defender moving forward in the final month of the season. Gilliam, to your point, has not started a game this year. All the starts have gone to a senior in Alonzo Ford, a guy who's in his 6th year at the college level. But I think we've got a long run of games now where Gilliam's the guy who's actually getting more snaps over the course of those 60 minutes. He's been number 2, pacing behind Zane Durant in that category. So just to address that for a second, and on the offensive line, I think there's a lot of names that are interesting. Yeah. We haven't seen a lot of them this year. They've really stuck to 7 guys. Even Cooper Cousins hasn't played a bunch as the 7th man in that conversation. But you look at the tackle spot specifically, Tyler. You talked about Malachi Goodman, and that's warranted because he was a 5-star guy in the most recent cycle. But we know how highly they have thought of Egan Boyer in his development, putting on those 60 pounds, becoming maybe a tackle of the future type. Garrett Sexton's been another build them up kind of project for them over the last couple of years. Those are 2 redshirt freshmen. And so when you start to sort through that and you remember that these are prototypes for Phil Trautwein, and he's the guy who's had his eyes on them, this is one of those things we have to mention. Who's going to be the position coach for these groups? But what do you make of generally that depth at tackle and Penn State's ability to keep pieces in place? Because I'll remind our listeners, Drew Shelton is down to his final few games of college eligibility. Nolan Rucci's down to his final few games of college eligibility. And the guy who started at right tackle last week, Anthony Donko, doesn't seem like anyone's quite sure whether he belongs at guard or tackle at this stage of his career. So those are three guys that I've long kind of pegged as important pieces for this O-line moving forward. And now that we're talking about a changing climate in the offensive line room potentially, and for this offense in general, they come to the forefront for me again.
Yeah, a lot of those old linemen I mentioned, potential fit for the next position coach, for the next scheme. Some of those tackles, those young tackles kind of are coming to question because Phil Schreiber recruits to a specific type at tackle. We've seen him build up a lot of guys who arrived as raw, athletic, but they
Let me
can
mention
move.
one more who I
Yeah.
forgot. Owen
Oh, and I
Alasine,
was saying,
a guy
yeah.
who came to campus and has really kind of been ahead of the curve where they thought he might be. He got some work, I believe, at tackle early on in non-conference play. Another guy that I would throw into the conversation.
Yeah, no doubt. And I was going to factor him into that as well. Guys like Boyer, Sexton, Alasine, all of them come in a certain type. And I do think it's a type that also carries over to whoever the next Penn State offensive line coach will be from a fit perspective. Because, again, I mentioned it with Goodman. There are certain traits that you can't teach an offensive lineman. Egan Boyer has bulked up and still moves around like he was 250 when we saw him at camp. Garrett Sexton has bulked up, maintained all the athleticism that made him an intriguing offensive tackle prospect. Same with Owen Alaside. He's so limber and agile at his size. That's a type that, yes, it has been Phil Schreiber's type throughout his tenure as Penn State's offensive line coach, and you've seen it come more and more throughout the most recent recruiting cycles where he's really been able to go out and get his kind of guy in that ilk. But those are traits I think any O-line coach would love to work with. So I think it's just a matter of seeing who the guy is and what exactly he prioritizes. But with so much to replace on the offensive line next year, you want to be able to keep as many high-level, high-ceiling depth pieces as you possibly can. I say it time and time again when these offensive line classes get built, the numbers are higher for a reason. You just got to have guys on board who can contribute for you, or at the very least, develop behind the scenes as underclassmen and then get to the point where they contribute for you. Because, look, not every offensive line recruit is going to be a hit, but I think Penn State has built a stable of young offensive linemen that the arrow is pointing up. These guys are heading in the right direction in their development, and it's going to be on the next Penn State offensive line coach to ultimately decide if they want to continue that developmental process. But my gut tells me just what we know about these kids, what their skill sets are, and what their ceilings look like, just from our own independent thoughts, opposite of, any potential scheme fit issues or anything like that. I think a lot of these guys are going to be worth keeping around. It's why I felt weird limiting it to 10, because honestly, there's a lot more than 10 young players on this roster worth keeping around. There's no doubt about that.
When you get over to the skill positions on offense, we just haven't seen a lot of them in game action for the younger guys. One of those that we have is Luke Reynolds. And I had a conversation with someone after we were leaving the practice field last week. And while Reynolds hasn't, filled up the box score lately, he doesn't have the stats maybe you would have hoped for his sophomore season. I know Andrew Rapplier actually out-snapped him in Columbus 31-30, kind of a 3 tight end show at this point. But he, to me, the best thing that he does, and a big reason why he was the #1 ranked tight end in America coming out of high school, is getting vertical, being that vertical threat. And I think we know by now this is one of the worst vertical passing games in college football. And so that's not been a great way to showcase his skills. And in my opinion, he needs to be a priority, because not only does he still, to me, project as a big-time playmaker for your passing game, but he's also the kind of guy you want in your locker room, the guy who is big on accountability. I think he says the right things and does the right things, and not just when the camera's on him. And so to me, he'd also be one of the first guys who's getting inquiries from other coaching staffs, because they know who this guy was. He was the top tight end in America. They know how they can maybe add a new dynamic to their offense by bringing him in. And to me, him and Kobe Howard stand out. Howard, obviously far less. We'll see if that changes in the next month, if he can start to get some game film. But one way or the next, he was able to get some practice film out in the social media world a couple different times. So there are clips of him doing things on a practice field. We'll see if he can start to do more in a game. But those two, Tyler, I know Kobe Howard wasn't the level of recruit that Luke Reynolds was coming out, but he's somebody that we've heard so many good things about what he's done behind the scenes. We're starting to see a little bit of it in game action, back-to-back games where he has the longest catch for this Penn State squad. But bouncing those names off you, Kobe Howard, Luke Reynolds, and the viability of the next coaching staff to keep them here on this campus. And we got to remind people, Howard's coming all the way from South Florida. So it's not like he's got regional ties here, whereas Luke Reynolds up in the New England area, not a lot of big-time football up there. So I think those are some things to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Had I not placed such an emphasis on the O-line and D-line in this article, Reynolds easily would have been included. Same deal with Olish, the number 3 tight end in that 25 signing class. Another guy who, once he reaches where Penn State believes he could get in his development, he could be a serious vertical threat for you in the passing game. That's what Penn State needs. It's kind of crazy that, this time last year, I don't think anyone would have had Kobe Howard pegged in a conversation like this because there were questions among the fan base about him as a prospect because he just didn't have the same profile as some of the other wide receivers in the class. But he has done everything that he's had to do since he got to Penn State. It's like I said earlier, you need some guys like him on the perimeter to get this wide receiver room turned around and headed back in the right direction. You want to be more dynamic. You want to be more explosive in the passing game. Guys like Kobe Howard at wide receiver, guys like Luke Reynolds at tight end, it would probably behoove you to keep them around. I think it would be of great benefit to the next Penn State staff because they have skill sets also that I think could work in a lot of different systems. I don't think an offense would be inserted that would phase out a guy like Luke Reynolds and his strength as a pass-catching tight end. I don't think an offensive system would play away from Kobe Howard's strengths as a developing and budding wide receiver talent. So I think those guys, opposite of scheme fit or anything, you don't have to worry about them. I think they've got the goods to be contributors, and that's why Howard was on the list. Reynolds got a mention at the end again. If I didn't place such an emphasis on the O-line deal, because I think that's really where this next Penn State staff has to start. You've got to make sure you're strong up front on both sides. Reynolds would have been a very easy inclusion. Me and you have loved him since he was a recruit. We've seen all we need to see out of him as a recruit. I do think that he's heading in the right direction. Like you said, I know the production hasn't been maybe at the level some people anticipated it would be this year, but I think he's still going to get there.
This pass game production stinks, though. I mean, so how much does that stink apply to? I mean, let's just be honest. The pass game stinks right now. So how much can we be like, well, why isn't Luke Reynolds putting up big numbers? He's supposed to be this 5-star tight end. Well, no one's putting up big numbers. They can barely throw for 150 yards game by game. This passing game stinks.
Yeah, and obviously a guy like Reynolds is going to suffer in a situation like that. You're not going to have prolific numbers in a passing attack that is below average. And you made a very good point. If he's a guy who decides he wants to seek an opportunity elsewhere, hit the portal, at least explore, he's going to have a lot of suitors because there were teams that came late for Reynolds in the 24 cycle, and he spurned them, said, no, I'm good here at Penn State. But those coaching staffs that came for Luke Reynolds, they're still in place, and they didn't forget about him. They know who he is, like you said. So same deal with Howard as a Florida kid. I know he wasn't as high level of a recruit, but if he wants to explore other opportunities, I mean, you have to figure some of those Florida programs that were interested in him early in his recruitment before he suffered that gruesome leg injury that kind of turned a lot of programs in a different direction with their wide receiver recruiting. I think both of those guys would have markets. That doesn't necessarily keep them all the more important to keep because you're going to prioritize what you're going to prioritize, but it speaks to their talent and it speaks to the thought of them around college football and speaking with people who are in the know in that way. So they're definitely important in their own right. There's no doubt about that.
We're looking ahead at the final 4 Big Ten matchups that involve Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. They're going to go down very highly on a lot of leaderboards here in program history. Obviously, it's been a much better senior season for Katron than it has been for Singleton. But these guys are gone regardless going into 2026. We've known that for a while. It was a surprise that they were still together in 2025. What is also a surprise is we know nothing about anyone at the running back position beyond them. We last saw another running back involved, I believe, in non-conference play. I think Cam Wallace got maybe a carry or 2 against Villanova. Corey Smith has been fielding some kickoffs lately. We saw Quentin Martin field a kickoff in Columbus. Smith hasn't gotten a carry since the first game against Nevada. Quentin Martin hasn't checked into a game on offense, and that's without getting into the 2 true freshmen in Tyke Hayes and also Jabri Wallace-Coleman. So, I mean, there's going to be an exodus from this room regardless. Not all 5 of those guys are going to stick around in the post-Katron and Singleton era. I don't know if Stan Drayton's around beyond this year. It's been really hard to get a read on whatever the hell is happening in that room beyond those top 2 players who we know so much about already. Do you have any intel to add to this conversation? To me, if there's someone who maybe has been kind of leaned into a bit over the course of this fall as maybe being that next man up, and maybe is Corey Smith. But again, until a coach is actually putting one of those running backs into the game, and I don't know if we see that in the next month, it's really hard for us to get any kind of semblance on pecking order or who might be really stepping up going into spring camp next year.
Yeah, I think you just have to see it on the field from these guys because, I mean, No, they still love Quentin Martin and his versatility. There's a very high opinion of Tyke Hayes from the 25 class internally. Same with
You
Jabri
sure? Wait,
Coleman.
are you sure they still love Quentin Martin and his versatility? Because this is an offense that could use an infusion of versatility. He's been referenced as a big-time pass catcher.
Yeah.
He's been talked about as his piece, and he has no role on an offense that's as sputtering. I'm not sure I believe they love anybody in this running back room right now.
That leads me into my next point. Like, I could sit here and say they have all these high opinions of these guys, but I mean, at this point, does anyone really want to hear it? I mean, it's kind of fluff until you go out and put them on the field and you see what they could do. I think Corey Smith has a skill set to be a guy in this running back room, but I think we need to see a little bit of a larger sample size from him. I mean, beyond the Washington game last year, he's barely been on the field. So, what are you going to do? I could sit here and wax poetic about what I hear behind the scenes about some of these guys and what the current Penn State staff believes about some of these guys, but until they go out there and do it, until we could quantify it in some way and we see with our own eyes, I mean, it's kind of just hype. So we'll see where this running back room goes long term. It's probably one of the more interesting position groups to follow right now from a long term perspective because not all these guys were even recruited by Standray. I mean, Jaywan Sider was at the forefront of a lot of these recruitments. So not only is Sider out of the picture now that he's at Notre Dame, I mean, y'all got the potential for a whole new coaching staff coming in. So where does that leave a lot of these guys? I would say with Tyke Hayes, he probably falls into the category of if Terry Smith is back on this staff next year, there's a really strong chance of retainment because, I mean, it's Terry Smith's godson. Those two are very, very close.
Yes.
So that was a key part of that recruitment at a high school level. So that would probably matter from a retainment perspective as well. Same deal with Quentin Martin, obviously, Western PA guy. Terry Smith, that's his realm. So we'll see what would happen there. But yeah, this running back room, I think I have it circled going into the offseason as one of the more intriguing position groups to follow because you could have pretty close to a hard reset at the position.
Yeah. And all five of those guys we just talked about are either sophomore eligibility or freshman eligibility. Just haven't gotten a read on them. And Tyke Hayes is the kind of guy who would go from nothing this year to getting
something.
like 15 snaps or 15 carries a game next year.
Yeah.
That would not surprise me at all. He's that kind of guy. I've been high on him for a while. For one reason or another, we just haven't seen an RB3 emerge. Maybe it was Jackson Smoke a couple weeks ago. He was the RB3 and then he got hurt. I don't know, but there hasn't. Yeah. And so, Tyler, I think in terms of actions speaking louder than words from this coaching staff and whether or not they're actually utilizing players, running back and linebacker, there's some connection there. Because at linebacker, we saw Alex Tash get some work in Columbus. It was his first time playing in the Big Ten. He hadn't played since going back to that Villanova matchup. He took about 16 snaps or so off the plate of Dom DeLuca, who wasn't at 99% of the snaps this time around. We'll see if Tash has a step forward there. Cam Smith has been bounced around as someone else who could get involved. That hasn't really materialized so far. Anthony Specca last year was talked about a guy who could burn his red shirt. Now he's a red shirt freshman, and he's not really sniffing playing time in any meaningful games. And so you factor in that Kari Jackson, a red shirt freshman, has been really impacted by injuries over the course of his college career so far. He has gotten back to the practice field, but he's been listed as out for every single game this season, just as he was last season. So tough go for him. Is this another room that you get to the finish line and you keep your fingers crossed that you can keep Tony Rojas, who's obviously going to be at the top of the list for roster retention? We're talking about younger players here. I can hear your dog is excited about this topic of conversation. But you have Amari Campbell. Maybe he's back. Maybe he's not. Does he transfer again? Does he look to go to the NFL? He's been really solid for them as a junior. And Don DeLuca's career is coming to a close. So much like running back, is this a spot where you think that could be, in a lot of ways, a reboot? Or do you qualify a guy like Tash as someone who's, maybe a really important piece to keep for the next staff? And he's an in-state guy as well.
Yeah, so here's why I actually think that keeping a lot of these young linebackers on the roster is actually going to be really important for this next staff. I've written about it. Doan's written about it. Penn State has had to adjust its linebacker recruiting philosophy to get more athletic at the position because it plays more to Jim Knowles' system and what Jim Knowles likes to do. Regardless of whether Jim Knowles is a D coordinator for Penn State or not next year, you just have to be more athletic at the linebacker position in today's college football. You got to be able to cover in space. You got to be able to make plays sideline to sideline. The days of the thumper kind of linebacker at all of your linebacker positions, it's probably not going to work for you if you want to have a successful defense. So I think guys like Alex Tash, Cam Smith, obviously LeVar Arrington, the second year junior, he's going to be factored in this conversation as well. They have that athletic profile that makes you think they can help you at the position. Now, does that mean they're going to stick around? I don't know. Maybe the in-state guy like Tesh is a little bit more inclined to do so. Cam Smith, I know he played at St. Joe's Prep in Philly, but he's a South Jersey native, and we all know LeVar Arrington Jr.'s ties to the program. I don't think I have to get into that. But there could be the kind of same reset at linebackers we see at running back, but I think it might be a little bit more important to keep these linebackers because you changed your overall recruiting philosophy to build the room a certain way, to bring in a certain archetype and a certain kind of player. Tash, Smith, Arrington, they fit that archetype. And in the 26 recruiting class as well, and again, I know people probably don't even want to hear about that given everything that's been going on, but guys like Terry Wiggins, Elijah Littlejohn, they're fast, they're athletic. You could plug them in multiple places. Those kinds of linebackers are the guys you want in your room in this era of college football. So I think it's important to keep some of these guys around, especially Tash and Smith, because I think they fit that profile of what Penn State could do at the linebacker position moving forward with whoever the new defensive coordinator is in 2026.
Last names I want to touch on in this conversation defensively, and these are two guys that I'm a pretty firm believer that you chart the next 3 years of their college careers, they could be top 5 guys in this 2025 class. Jameer Joseph and Darius Dixon at the cornerback position. Dixon has already burned his red shirt. He hasn't played much lately at the cornerback spot. He's contributing on special teams. We heard last week from Terry Smith that he thinks Joseph's the guy who could come on a bit more as the season goes forward. But to this point, he hasn't played a ton. He had a pick 6 in non-conference play. But both of them, in my opinion, could be multi-year starters at the cornerback spot. They could be all Big Ten caliber type players in your secondary. And Jameer Joseph is from North Jersey, where everyone recruits you in the country. And he's from one of those programs, perennial powerhouse, St. Joe, where everybody wants a piece of that. So that he had a lot of contact. And then Darius Dixon was such a huge win because you got him out of modern day, way out in the Los Angeles area, where, of course, there are always sharks circling around that program. To me, I project they're going to have to fight very hard to keep these guys. I'm also curious about Alan Zamitis and whether he is a guy who sticks around on this staff, a former All-American cornerback here at Penn State, a guy that has really proven to be an impact guy with development here at Penn State and then actually bringing in talent. And so there's more staff factors to consider. But do you think I'm on the right track in saying that Dixon and Johnson both belong near the top of whatever list the next head coach rolls out and says, we got to try to keep these guys on campus?
They were on my list, so yeah, I definitely agree. And I think they fall into the category of if Terry Smith's back, there's probably a good chance that they're back, especially Darius Dixon, because we touched on it time and time again how crucial Terry Smith was in Dixon's recruitment. You know, he was the reason why Penn State was there from the start. You know, going across the country to reel in a guy like Darius Dixon against top flight competition elsewhere, it says a lot about Smith's recruiting chops, not just in Pennsylvania, because I know that's what everyone talks about with Terry Smith, but he has been able to get it done nationally for Penn State, and you see it with a guy like Dixon. And I don't know about you, Tyler, but I have not heard Terry Smith talk about guys like Darius Dixon and Jameer Joseph compared to other, like the praise that he has harped on these guys, really going back.
Maybe one guy, and Kalen King. And remember, Kalen King was on track to be, all Big Ten, all American until the floor fell out underneath him as a junior. But yeah, that's the only other guy that comes to mind this early in their career coming on campus where Terry Smith was that, open and that much about praise.
Yeah, it just speaks to, I think, the upside internally that Penn State believes these two guys have. And, like I said, I mean, we have to see more of them because I don't want to go back on what I said about the running backs where we got to see guys. We could sit here and talk about how great things are behind the scenes, but until they go out and produce, we have seen a little bit more of that with Darius Dixon and Jameer Joseph, though. So I think there is credence to the notion that they could take a step up as the year progresses. And if they're retained, I think that's going to be important that they are retained. They could be impact cornerbacks for Penn State for an extended period of time. I think both of them have the talent to be those players, and I think they will, whether it be at Penn State or elsewhere. I believe they will develop into impact college football players. So I think it's going to be high on this the new Penn State stats list to keep those two, because you got to be able to defend on the perimeter. We know Darius Dixon can do it, and we haven't quite seen it as much as Dixon yet, but Jameer Joseph could do it too. I've seen enough of him to have confidence in that. Once he gets there, he's going to get there, and he's going to make an impact.
Fittingly, as we're working our way to the end of this conversation, get a message from Daniel Gallen, our colleague at Lions 24/7. He has confirmation from Penn State that redshirt sophomore tight end Joey Schlaffer no longer with the program, a former in-state player, part of a logjam of young talent at tight end. They brought in 3 freshman this year. You brought in Luke Reynolds the year after Schlaffer, but that's the first kind of departure that we've seen thus far post-coaching change, and I think it's going to be the first of many as we get through the next couple of months. And Tyler, appreciate your perspective on this. I think people should head over to Lions247.com to check out your full list and kind of breaking these guys down individually. It'll be a topic of conversation we get into. But let's close out this episode by taking a look toward the recruiting trail. What do we need to know about Kevin Brown, Penn State's top offensive commit, an offensive lineman who was offered during his freshman year at Harrisburg High School? They think the world of this kid. He has been absolutely locked in with them until the James Franklin move. He watched Penn State lose in Columbus last week while being hosted by the Ohio State staff. Where do things stand with Kevin Brown as you gather them right now? And who are the other commits on the move that we need to know about? What can you bring us here?
Still the belief that Penn State's going to be in a strong spot to sign Kevin Brown as long as the new head coaching hire is received well by Brown and his father. But I think it's more of a battle now than it was at this time last week. After he made it out to West Virginia for that visit during the midweek official visit, and then made it to Columbus to visit Ohio State during the weekend, watched the Buckeyes take down the Nittany Lions, and he might make it back to Ohio State for an official. So I think it's definitely more of a battle now than it was when we discussed the subject last, which, doesn't come as a surprise because the fact of the matter is Kevin Brown just doesn't know when a hire is going to take place. Yes, he can be as patient as he wants to be and let things play out, and you can say the same for the rest of the remaining commits. But if you want to enroll early, the earlier you know Penn State's next head coach, the better. And there's no guarantee of when exactly a hire is going to come. So Brown, like many, many others, they're not just sitting around waiting. They're exploring additional options. They're exploring their alternatives. They're taking the smart approach. Now, guys like Matt Sieg, he's going to be at Notre Dame for an official visit this weekend. We got a few other guys on the road this weekend. Isaac Chukwara has been on the road. He's a talented defensive lineman. Penn State would love to keep in the mix. And he's taking visits elsewhere. He spent the weekend at NC State, watched them beat Georgia Tech. He's going to keep exploring his options. Jackson Ford is a guy we haven't touched on a lot. Talk 24/7 in-state edge rusher from Malvern Prep. That's because he is not taking visits anywhere until his senior season ends, which will be this Saturday. So right now with Jackson Ford, he doesn't have any visits elsewhere scheduled, but there's obviously the possibility for that to change. Now, Ford has been exploring the possibility of making it back to Penn State for its regular season home finale against Nebraska on November 22nd. I think that'd be a pretty big win for Penn State. Marlon Bright is another guy who's going to be on campus this weekend. I think the big thing with the commits returning to campus, those who decide to do so, many others have official visits scheduled on the same dates as these next two Penn State home games. So it's not going to be able to happen for all of these guys. But I think the biggest thing for a guy like Marlon Bright, an offensive tackle who's been committed to Phil Charwin since the summer, and Jackson Ford, who's been committed to play on the edge since the summer, if they spend a weekend at Penn State, guess what? It keeps them from going elsewhere that weekend. It kind of extends the timeline. It gives Penn State more time to work with as the search for a new head coach continues. So getting these guys back is only a positive. It might not be the same kind of positive as there would be if we knew who the staff was going to be next year, but it keeps them from going elsewhere, which, hey, you got to view that as a plus. So those are just a few of the guys who are making the rounds. Jack Fuchs, he's going to be at Northwestern for an official visit this weekend. He's a talented O-lineman. I think Northwestern has the chance to make a real move there with him because with Fuchs, it's really Penn State, Kentucky, Northwestern, and Georgia's in the mix as well, but they have an offer. They're going to get him for an unofficial visit next weekend. But Kentucky's just as uncertain. I know Mark Stoops, he's still in place as the head coach, but his future's up in the air as well. So you go from Penn State, a situation with uncertainty, to Kentucky, another situation with uncertainty. That leaves the door open for Northwestern to make a move. So those are a few of the storylines I think we're monitoring in recruiting right now. There are many others. Terry Wiggins, top 24/7 in-state backers, going to West Virginia for an official this weekend. That's another one we're monitoring closely. But there's a lot to monitor with these visits elsewhere. But these guys are still exhibiting patience. And I think that's really all this current Penn State staff could hope for and ask for from this group.
So to summarize, a bunch of recruits decommitted. They've moved on. The ones who haven't are exploring other opportunities. Yeah. And we're all in a waiting game right now for this coaching search to see where Penn State gets on some solid ground eventually through the process. Tyler, it's going to be a weird Saturday. We already discussed the fact that an Indiana team that trails 25-2 in the all-time series is visiting Beaver Stadium as a 2-touchdown favorite. That's weird. James Franklin will not be there for the first time at a Penn State home game since 2013. Terry Smith will be introduced on the big board as the head coach on Saturday. And I'm just curious. I'm not asking for a lot of detail because I know there aren't a lot at this point, and you'll provide them over at Lions 24/7 as you get more of a read on the guest list. But putting the guest list aside, what the hell is going to happen this Saturday without James Franklin being part of the plan from a recruiting standpoint? And what do you make of what they're maybe trying to accomplish with 2 home games left and everything in flux from a leadership standpoint?
It's weird, different, however, whatever adjective you want to use to describe this, I think it applies. It's going to be a weekend where we're not really banking on a whole lot of high quality guys visiting. I think that's something that if you're a Penn State fan, you'd probably expect that because there are other places recruits can visit this weekend. You don't have to worry about who the head coach is going to be at that program next year. And it's a tough situation for Penn State, I think, mainly because this was shaping up before everything went off the rails. This was going to be the second really big in-season recruiting opportunity following the whiteout. Because had things gone to expectation, this would have been top 5, top 10 matchup, depending on how the rankings shake out. It would have been juicy. It would have reminded, I think, visitors list-wise, it could have rivaled what Penn State put together for the Ohio State game last year in early November. But such is life. Things went a different direction. So it's not going to be a huge recruiting weekend. Neither of these final 2 home games, they're not going to be big recruiting weekends. I put that in air quotes for those who are watching online because I mentioned Bright. Maybe Jackson Ford circles back for the Nebraska game. I think it's big to get as many commits back as you can, but some guys are just doing their own thing. And when it comes to the 27s, 28s, I mean, staff's working it. It's not for a lack of effort. They're trying to keep an eye on the future and trying to get guys to campus. Like I talked to Cam Toomey, a top 128 defensive lineman out of New York, and he had this game circled on his schedule. It's looking like he's still going to visit, but you're just not going to get a lot of guys like that on campus these next 2 home games. And that's how it's going to be until a new head coach is hired. So it's kind of it's odd that the end of November is kind of going to be a wash for home games because you're not used to that, but that's the reality of it right now.
Yeah, different kind of November than we've seen in a long time here in Happy Valley. And that's just, like you said, that's the reality. Tyler, really appreciate it. The reality is you are fantastic at covering recruiting for Penn State. I know it's a rough patch right now doing it, but you're giving the good and the bad news, and that's your job. And hopefully down the road here, there'll be more good news flowing for Penn State recruiting you'll be able to report on. But appreciate you giving us the lowdown on what's happening. The roster retention conversation is very interesting. I think you have a lot of good intel on that, a lot of good background on that. And so we'll pick that up as this month goes into December, and because that's going to be a lot to discuss in the next several weeks. Appreciate you, man. We'll catch up with you real soon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me back. And hopefully next time I'm on, we have some good stuff to talk about. I'm not sure, but who knows?
All right. Well, see you, man.
Later.
Good stuff from Tyler Calvaruso. Before him, we got a good breakdown of the Indiana Hoosiers from Matt Weaver within our 24/7 Sports Network covering Indiana. We're going to step aside for now. A few hours, I will be out at the Penn State practice field along with Grace Brennan, Mark Brennan, and Daniel Gown. We'll have photo galleries, notebooks from both sides of the ball, video highlights, and we'll get a chance to hear from interim head coach Terry Smith once again, along with some veteran Penn State players. So check all that out at lions247.com, where you can also find our coaching search hotboard and thread. Join that conversation now for 50% off, or sign up for 1 month and automatically get access to Paramount Plus. A couple options there for you. For now, I'm stepping aside. Thanks as always for listening or watching the Lions 24/7 podcast.